I want a younger partner in bed instead of you. I can't live with you anymore, she shouted at her loyal husband after 10 years of marriage. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the autumn evening at the Golden family estate painted a picture of privilege and tradition. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathered crowd, celebrating the engagement of Nancy's cousin Elizabeth to a prominent lawyer. Ollie Robinson stood near the refreshment table, feeling somewhat out of place in his well-fitted but modest suit. He had come as a +1 with his college friend James, who had business connections with the Golden family. At 35, Ollie had built a respectable life for himself. The son of a carpenter and a schoolteacher, he had worked his way through college, earning an accounting degree while holding down 2 jobs. His diabetes diagnosis at 30 had been a setback, but like everything else in his life, he faced it with quiet determination and grace. His dark skin gleamed with health despite his condition, and his broad shoulders carried the confidence of a man who had earned everything he possessed. Nancy Golden moved through the party like a beam of sunlight, her 20-year-old vitality turning heads wherever she went. Her blonde hair cascaded down her back in carefully styled waves, and her blue eyes sparkled with the kind of innocence that comes from a life untouched by hardship. She wore a pale pink dress that probably cost more than Ollie's monthly salary, but it was her genuine smile that caught his attention. Their first conversation happened by accident. Nancy had retreated to the relative quiet of the garden terrace, seeking respite from her mother's constant parading of eligible bachelors. Ollie had stepped out for fresh air, his blood sugar feeling slightly off. Their eyes met over the rim of his water glass, and instead of the awkward silence he expected, Nancy spoke first. "You don't look like you're enjoying the party either," she said, her voice carrying a hint of conspiracy. "I'm Nancy." "Ollie Robinson," he replied, surprised by her directness, "and parties like this aren't exactly my natural habitat." She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "They're not mine either, believe it or not. Everyone here is so prescribed. Do this, marry that person, live exactly this way." She mimicked her mother's voice perfectly, drawing a chuckle from Ollie. They talked for hours that night, long after other guests had begun to leave. Nancy was fascinated by Ollie's stories of working his way through college, of his dreams to start his own business someday. He found himself drawn to her unexpected depth, the way she questioned the privileged world she'd been born into, her desire to make her own mark on the world. The opposition began almost immediately. Nancy's father, Richard Golden, a man whose family wealth stretched back generations, was apoplectic when he discovered his youngest daughter spending time with Ollie. Her mother, Victoria, alternated between tears and threats of disinheritance. The word scandal was thrown around like confetti at their society gatherings. But Nancy, perhaps for the first time in her life, stood her ground. She saw in Ollie what her parents couldn't or wouldn't see, a man of integrity, kindness, and unwavering dedication. When he had to cancel dates because of his diabetes acting up, she would show up at his apartment with healthy home-cooked meals, though her first attempts were barely edible. When he worked late at the accounting firm, she would surprise him with coffee and sit quietly reading while he finished his work. Their courtship lasted 8 months, each day strengthening their resolve, despite the mounting pressure from Nancy's family. Ollie's parents, though concerned about the challenges their son would face in an interracial marriage, saw Nancy's genuine love for their son and welcomed her with open arms. His mother taught Nancy family recipes, and his father shared stories of Ollie's childhood, making her feel part of a family that valued love over appearance. The wedding was small but meaningful, held in Ollie's family church. Nancy wore a simple white dress, rather than the designer gown her mother had tried to bribe her with. She walked down the aisle alone, her family's empty seats a stark reminder of their disapproval. But when Ollie saw her walking toward him, his eyes glistening with tears of joy, Nancy knew she had made the right choice. His vows, spoken in his deep, steady voice, promised not just love but understanding, patience, and unwavering support. Nancy's voice trembled as she promised to be not just his wife, but his partner in all of life's challenges. As they drove away from the church, rice still caught in their hair. Neither could have predicted the journey ahead. Nancy's youth and Ollie's health would become factors in their story, but in that moment their love felt eternal, unshakable. The autumn sun painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, a fitting backdrop to a union that defied societal norms and family expectations. A love story that began with a chance meeting at a family gathering and blossomed into something neither of them had expected to find. The early years. The first rays of morning sunlight would find Ollie already awake, testing his blood sugar levels before carefully planning Nancy's breakfast. Their modest two-bedroom apartment, located in a middle-class neighborhood, became a sanctuary of love and dedication. Every morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and whatever breakfast creation Ollie had mastered that week would waft through their home, a daily reminder of his devotion. Nancy had grown up with housekeepers preparing her meals, but there was something special about watching her husband move through their small kitchen, his broad shoulders and gentle hands, crafting each meal with precision and care. He had learned to cook out of necessity when his diabetes diagnosis demanded a stricter diet, but it had evolved into an art form, a way to express his love through nourishment. Their morning routine became a cherished ritual. Ollie would wake at 5:30 a.m., check his glucose levels, take his medication, and begin preparing breakfast. By 6:45 a.m., everything would be perfect. Fresh fruit arranged just so, eggs cooked to Nancy's preference, whites firm, yolks runny, and whole grain toast with the homemade sugar-free berry preserves his mother had taught him to make. He'd wake Nancy with a gentle kiss, and they'd share breakfast together before he headed to the accounting firm. The early months of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Nancy learned to navigate life without her family's wealth, cushioning every fall. She took pride in learning to manage their household budget, clip coupons, and find joy in simpler pleasures. Her friends from her previous life gradually drifted away, unable to understand her choices. But Nancy found new friendships among their neighbors and Ollie's family. Ollie worked tirelessly at the accounting firm, putting in extra hours to ensure their financial stability. His diabetes sometimes made long days challenging, but he never complained. Instead, he'd return home with small surprises for Nancy. Her favorite flowers from the street vendor, a book she'd mentioned wanting to read, or ingredients for her favorite meals. On particularly tough days when his blood sugar would fluctuate, Nancy would find him in the kitchen, determination in his eyes as he prepared their dinner, refusing to let his condition diminish his role as a provider and protector. Their weekends developed their own rhythm. Saturday mornings meant grocery shopping together, with Ollie teaching Nancy about selecting fresh produce and making economical choices. She loved watching him interact with the local vendors, his natural charm and genuine interest in their lives, creating a community around them. Afternoons often found them in their small kitchen, Ollie patiently teaching Nancy to cook, their laughter filling the apartment as she made her inevitable mistakes. Sundays were reserved for family visits. Ollie's parents welcomed them warmly each week, his mother continuing to mentor Nancy in family recipes and traditions. These gatherings helped ease the ache Nancy felt from her own family's absence. Her parents had maintained their silence since the wedding, returning her letters unopened and blocking her phone calls. But in the warmth of the Robinson family home, surrounded by love that asked nothing in return, Nancy found a different kind of wealth. Their intimate moments were tender and sweet, though sometimes limited by Ollie's health concerns. He was conscientious about managing his diabetes, but there were times when physical intimacy had to take a back seat to his health needs. Nancy never complained, instead finding other ways to express their love. through gentle touches, long conversations, and simple acts of care. As their first year of marriage progressed, they settled into a comfortable routine. Ollie's promotion at work allowed them to start saving for their dreams, a house of their own, children, a future built on their shared love and determination. Nancy had begun taking classes at the local community college, discovering a passion for early childhood education that surprised and delighted her. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, subtle strains were beginning to show. Nancy's youth sometimes manifested in restlessness, a desire for excitement that their careful, measured life couldn't always provide. Ollie's focus on health and stability occasionally felt constraining to her younger spirit, and though she never voiced it, there were moments when the physical limitations imposed by his diabetes left her feeling unfulfilled. Still, love prevailed through those early challenges. Each morning, as Ollie prepared breakfast with the same care and attention he'd shown since their first day together, their apartment would fill with the warmth of home-cooked meals and unwavering devotion. Neither of them could have guessed that these gentle morning moments, these carefully crafted expressions of love, would soon become memories tinged with both sweetness and sorrow. The letter that changed everything. The envelope sat innocently on their shared mahogany dresser, Nancy's flowing handwriting spelling out Ollie in careful strokes. The morning sun, streaming through their bedroom window, caught the edge of the paper, creating a soft glow that belied the devastation contained within. The house was unnaturally quiet, missing the usual sounds of children's laughter and Nancy's morning routine. My dearest Ollie, by the time you read this, the children and I will be gone. I've been trying to find the right words for months, but there's no gentle way to shatter someone's world. I know this will hurt you, and perhaps that's what I've been afraid of most. Your pain has always affected me more than my own. I was just 20 when we married. 20, Ollie. I barely knew who I was, let alone what I wanted from life. You've been everything a wife could ask for, kind, devoted, loving. You've never raised your voice, never forgotten a birthday or anniversary, never failed to show up when we needed you. You've been perfect, and that's part of the problem. While you were being perfect, I was suffocating. The careful routines, the measured meals, the precise scheduling of intimacy around your health needs, it's all been so structured, so safe, so predictable. I find myself longing for spontaneity, for passion that doesn't check blood sugar levels first, for a life that isn't mapped out in doctor's appointments and insulin schedules. I met someone. His name doesn't matter, but he makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He's my age, full of energy and dreams that match my own. When he touches me, I don't feel like someone's precious china doll, carefully handled and preserved. I feel real, vibrant, young. The children adore you, and that makes this harder. You've been an amazing father, and I know this will hurt them too. But I can't keep living this lie. Every morning when you bring me breakfast in bed, every time you surprise me with my favorite takeout, every gentle kiss and careful touch, it all feels like a beautifully crafted performance of love, rather than the wild, passionate reality I crave. I've arranged for the children to transfer to a new school. My lawyer will be in touch about custody arrangements. I'm not asking for anything else. You can keep the house, the savings, everything. Consider it my final acknowledgement of your unwavering generosity. Please don't try to find us. Don't call my friends. They won't know where I am. I've made sure of that. Don't reach out to my family. They're as surprised by this as you are. They may have disapproved of our marriage, but even they had come to respect the life we built. I know you'll blame yourself. Analyze every moment of our marriage looking for the signs you missed. Don't. The truth is, I've been playing a part, the grateful young wife, rescued from her gilded cage by a mature, stable man. But I'm not that girl anymore, and I can't keep pretending. The hardest part is knowing you'll forgive me. Your capacity for understanding and compassion has always been boundless. Even now, reading this letter that's tearing your world apart, I know you're probably worrying about me, hoping I'll be safe and happy. That's who you are, Ollie. And any woman would be lucky to have such a loving husband. But I need more than love. I need fire, passion, uncertainty. I need to make mistakes and learn from them. I need to live without a safety net, without carefully measured portions and precisely timed medications. I need to be young while I still can. Marrying you was my biggest mistake, not because you weren't wonderful, but because I wasn't ready for wonderful. I was ready for chaos and passion and all the beautiful disasters that come with young love. I'm sorry it took me 10 years to understand that. Take care of yourself, Ollie. Remember to check your blood sugar, even when the pain of this betrayal makes you want to forget everything else. Keep making your amazing breakfasts, even if they're just for one now. Keep being the incredible man you are. Just do it for someone who can appreciate it properly. Goodbye, Nancy. The letter was written on the expensive stationery he had bought her for Christmas, the paper now warped in places from fallen tears. Whether his or hers, it was impossible to tell. The morning light continued its relentless advance across the room, illuminating the empty closet where her clothes had hung just yesterday, the vacant spots on the dresser where her perfumes and lotions had stood, the bare walls where family photos had smiled down at them for years. In the kitchen, the ingredients for that morning's breakfast sat untouched. Fresh strawberries, whole grain bread, egg whites. He had planned to surprise her with her favorite breakfast, to celebrate the good news from his doctor about his improving condition. The diamond ring in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds now, its sparkle dimmed by the reality of empty rooms and silent spaces. The children's rooms told their own story of careful planning. Favorite toys and clothes gone, but enough left behind to make it look like they might return any moment. She had orchestrated their departure with precision that rivaled his own careful planning of meals and medications. The irony wasn't lost on him, even through the haze of shock and grief. On the refrigerator, their daughter's last art project still hung, a family portrait in crayon showing all 4 of them holding hands under a smiling sun. The breakfast dishes from yesterday were still in the drying rack, waiting to be put away. Every corner of the house held memories of their shared life, now transformed into monuments to what was lost. The sunlight reached the letter again, highlighting the words that would echo in his mind for years to come. Marrying you was my biggest mistake. 10 years of love, dedication, and careful nurturing, reduced to a mistake in flowing handwriting on expensive paper. A father's strength. The morning after finding Nancy's letter, Ollie woke up at his usual time of 5:30 a.m., his body still faithfully following the routine of a decade. For a brief moment, in the hazy space between sleep and consciousness, everything was normal. Then reality crashed over him like a cold wave, bringing with it the memory of empty rooms and that devastating letter. But there was no time for self-pity. His children would be returning from their overnight stay at their friend's house in just 2 hours, and they needed breakfast. Standing in the kitchen, Ollie's hands trembled as he tested his blood sugar. The emotional turmoil had wreaked havoc on his glucose levels, but he forced himself to go through his medication routine. His children would need him more than ever now, and he couldn't afford to let his health slip. The diamond ring he'd planned to surprise Nancy with sat untouched in his dresser drawer, a glittering reminder of shattered dreams. 7-year-old Marcus and 5-year-old Lily burst through the door at 7:30 a.m., their overnight bags dragging behind them, unaware that their world had fundamentally changed. Their neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had kept them overnight, gave Ollie a concerned look. Nancy had told her she was going away for a while, but hadn't explained further. Ollie managed a grateful nod, his throat too tight for words. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Lily asked, her small face scrunching up in confusion as she noticed the unusual quiet in the house. Marcus, more perceptive at his age, had already sensed something was wrong, his dark eyes scanning the room with growing anxiety. Ollie gathered them both in his arms, their small bodies warm against his chest. How do you tell children that their mother has chosen a different life, one that doesn't include them? How do you explain abandonment without breaking their trust in love itself? He took a deep breath, steadying himself for the hardest conversation of his life. Mommy has decided to live somewhere else for a while, he began carefully, his voice catching, but I want you both to know that it's not because of anything you did. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that are hard to understand. Marcus pulled away slightly, his face a mirror of Ollie's own determination. Is she coming back? The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. No, buddy, she's not coming back to live with us. But that doesn't change how much she loves you both. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. How could love and abandonment coexist? But he knew his children needed to believe in their mother's love, even if he couldn't understand her choices. The next few weeks became a crash course in single parenthood. Ollie's boss at the accounting firm, understanding but bound by company policy, could only offer limited flexibility. The salary that had been tight but manageable for a family of 4 now had to stretch to cover childcare costs as well. His parents helped when they could, but they were aging and lived across town. Every morning became a carefully choreographed dance of glucose testing, medication, breakfast preparation, lunch packing, and getting 2 grieving children ready for school. Ollie learned to do Lily's hair through YouTube tutorials, his large hands becoming surprisingly adept at creating neat pigtails and braids. He mastered the art of removing grape juice stains from school uniforms and memorized the schedule of every after-school activity. The nights were the hardest. After tucking the children in, reading stories and checking for monsters under beds, Ollie would sit at the kitchen table with his accounting books, trying to make the numbers add up differently. The cost of childcare was eating through their savings, and his salary barely covered their basic needs. The diamond ring, still in its box, seemed to mock him from its hiding place. Marcus developed nightmares, waking up crying for his mother. Lily started having accidents at school, her young psyche struggling to process the abandonment. The school counselor suggested therapy, adding another expense to their stretched budget, but Ollie didn't hesitate. He sold his car, switching to public transportation to afford the sessions his children needed. During his lunch breaks at work, instead of eating, Ollie would research recipes that could be made in bulk and frozen, ways to stretch groceries further, and tips for single parents. His diabetes required careful meal planning, but now he had to balance his health needs with budget constraints and his children's preferences. He learned to hide vegetables in pasta sauces, to make homemade bread that was both healthy and cheap, to turn leftovers into new meals that excited his kids. The community rallied around them in small ways. Mrs. Thompson from next door would watch the kids for an hour after school until Ollie could get home from work. His mother taught him to sew, allowing him to repair clothes rather than replace them. The local library became their second home, providing free entertainment and a sense of stability through story times and children's programs. One evening, as Ollie sat watching his children do their homework at the kitchen table, an idea began to form. He'd always been good at cooking, and his necessity-driven experiments with healthy, budget-friendly meals had actually turned out quite well. The other parents at school had started asking for his recipes, particularly those designed for diabetic-friendly diets that kids would still eat. Looking at the stack of bills on the counter, Ollie made a decision. He would need to be brave one more time, not for himself, but for Marcus and Lily. Their future deserved more than just surviving. They deserved to thrive. The diamond ring, still unworn, could be seed money for a new beginning. His children needed more than a father who could barely keep them afloat. They needed someone who could show them how to turn pain into purpose. That night, after the kids were asleep, Ollie sat down at the kitchen table with a fresh notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Robinson Family Meals, healthy food for busy families." His hands were steady now, his purpose clear. The morning would bring another carefully orchestrated routine of medications, meals, and school preparations. But now it would also bring the first steps toward something new, something that was uniquely his, born from the ashes of his broken marriage, but nourished by the love for his children. The Rise. The journey from heartbroken single father to successful entrepreneur began in Ollie's modest kitchen, with a single post on the school's parent forum. "Healthy, budget-friendly meal prep service for busy families," the title read, accompanied by photos of his carefully portioned, diabetic-friendly meals that had caught other parents' attention during school potlucks. Within hours, 3 families had reached out, asking about prices and delivery options. The diamond ring, meant to celebrate his improving health with Nancy, instead became the foundation of his new venture. The jeweler's appraisal brought both pain and possibility. $12,000 would buy him commercial-grade cooking equipment and the initial supplies he needed. That evening, as Marcus and Lily helped him organize recipe cards at the kitchen table, Ollie felt something he hadn't experienced since finding Nancy's letter: hope. His first commercial kitchen was barely larger than a storage closet, rented during off-hours from a sympathetic church that ran a soup kitchen. Every evening after putting the children to bed, Ollie would spend 3 hours preparing meals for the next day's deliveries. His diabetes required frequent breaks to check his blood sugar, but he turned these moments into opportunities to refine his recipes, carefully noting how different ingredients affected his glucose levels. Word spread quickly through the parent network. Working mothers particularly appreciated his detailed heating instructions and nutritional information cards, while fathers praised the portion sizes that kept them satisfied without compromising health. What set Ollie's service apart wasn't just the food. It was the care he put into each meal. The same attention to detail he had once devoted to Nancy's breakfasts now transformed into a growing business. The challenges were numerous. Health department regulations required certificates he studied for late into the night. His initial delivery schedule had to be structured around his children's school hours and his accounting job. Every penny of profit went back into the business or towards his children's needs. There were nights when exhaustion made his hands shake as he checked his blood sugar, but he persevered. Marcus and Lily became integral parts of the operation. Weekend mornings found them helping to pack delivery boxes, Lily decorating the nutrition cards with carefully drawn flowers, Marcus learning to use the label maker with surprising efficiency. Their involvement helped heal the wounds of abandonment. They were building something new together, a family business born from adversity. 6 months in, Ollie faced a crucial decision. His meal service had grown beyond what he could manage while maintaining his accounting job. The church kitchen could no longer accommodate his expanding operation. Taking a deep breath, he submitted his resignation to the accounting firm, cashed out his modest 401k, and signed a lease on a small commercial kitchen space. The transition was terrifying. Without his steady paycheck, they moved to a smaller apartment. His parents, seeing his determination, offered to watch the children during the crucial evening prep hours. Mrs. Thompson, their former neighbor, became his first part-time employee, her grandmotherly presence adding an extra touch of home to the operation. Innovation came from necessity. When a client mentioned her diabetic husband struggling with meal plans, Ollie developed a specialized menu based on his own experiences. This led to a partnership with local diabetes clinics, who began recommending his service to their patients. His personal understanding of the disease's challenges helped him create meals that were both medically appropriate and genuinely enjoyable. The business grew organically, each satisfied customer becoming a passionate advocate. Local magazines began featuring his story, the single father who turned personal tragedy into triumph through cooking. But it was an unexpected viral social media post that changed everything. A client's TikTok video about the diabetic chef saving busy families garnered millions of views, bringing attention from national media. A year after starting his business, Ollie stood in his newly expanded kitchen, watching his team of 12 employees prepare meals for over 300 weekly subscribers. The menu had grown to include specialized plans for various dietary needs, but each meal still carried his signature attention to detail. His children had their own desk in the office area, where they did homework surrounded by the pleasant bustle of the kitchen. The diamond ring that had funded this journey now sat framed on his office wall, a reminder that endings could become beginnings. His diabetes, once a limitation, had become a strength, helping him understand and serve clients with similar health challenges. The careful portion control and nutritional balance that Nancy had found stifling in their marriage had become the foundation of a thriving business. Local business awards and recognition began to flow in. Entrepreneur of the Year, Community Impact Award, and Health Innovation in Food Service accolades lined the walls of his growing operation. But the achievement that meant the most was the day Marcus came home from school and announced proudly, "Dad, my teacher asked if you could cater our next parent-teacher conference. She says your food makes her feel good about eating." The ultimate validation came when a National Diabetes Association approached him about franchising his concept. They saw the potential in his combination of health-conscious cooking and personal understanding of dietary challenges. The contract they offered would allow him to maintain control of his original location while sharing his methods with a broader audience. As Ollie reviewed the franchise agreement late one night in his office, he could hear the quiet hum of the kitchen's cleaning crew. His expanded operation now ran almost 24 hours a day, providing employment for dozens of community members. On his desk sat a framed photo of Marcus and Lily at the grand opening of their second location, their smiles reflecting the pride they felt in their father's achievement. The pain of Nancy's departure would never completely fade, but it had transformed into something powerful. What began as a desperate attempt to provide for his children had evolved into a mission to help others find health and comfort through food. The careful routines that had once felt constraining to Nancy had become the foundation of an empire built on understanding, care, and the healing power of a well-prepared meal. The transformation success had given Ollie the resources to focus on his health in ways he never could before. His first trip to London's renowned diabetes clinic marked the beginning of a comprehensive transformation. The specialist there didn't just adjust his medication. She introduced him to cutting-edge treatments and monitoring, systems that would revolutionize his diabetes management. The London clinic's holistic approach opened new doors. Advanced continuous glucose monitoring technology allowed Ollie to understand how different types of exercise affected his blood sugar levels. Armed with this knowledge, he began working with a personal trainer who specialized in training diabetic clients. The trainer designed a program that balanced cardio and strength training, carefully monitoring his glucose levels throughout each session. His body began to change under the rigorous but carefully monitored training regime. The shoulders that had once hunched under the weight of betrayal and responsibility now stood straight and strong. His waistline trimmed down, muscle definition emerged, and his face took on a healthier, more youthful glow. The businessman's suits he now wore had to be tailored to accommodate his athletic build. Diet played a crucial role in his transformation. His experience developing healthy meals for his business transferred perfectly to his personal health journey. Working with a nutritionist, he refined his meal plans further, incorporating the latest research in diabetic nutrition. His improved health meant better blood sugar control, which in turn allowed him more flexibility in his fitness routine. The physical changes were remarkable, but the emotional transformation ran deeper. Regular sessions with a therapist helped him process the pain of Nancy's departure. He learned to view his diabetes not as a limitation, but as a teacher that had guided him toward a healthier, more disciplined life. The precision and care that had once driven Nancy away had become his greatest business asset. His children noticed the changes too. Marcus began joining him for morning workouts, while Lily declared him the strongest daddy in the world. Their pride in his transformation helped heal the lingering wounds of abandonment. The man who looked back at him in the mirror wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. Each passport stamp from his trips to London marked another milestone in his journey. The city became a symbol of his renaissance, each visit adding another layer to his transformation. On his last visit, the clinic's director asked him to speak to a group of newly diagnosed diabetic patients about his journey from victim to victor. The chance encounter. 7 years later, the busy city streets bustled with life as cars zipped past and pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks. The world had moved forward, and so had Ollie Robinson. He was no longer the man who had been left heartbroken by Nancy's departure. Time had hardened him, but not in bitterness. Instead, he had transformed that pain into purpose, rebuilding his life with a determination that surprised even himself. Dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal suit, Ollie stepped out of his sleek black car in front of an upscale cafe. The polished leather shoes that hit the pavement reflected the confidence of a man who had found success through perseverance. His broad shoulders and athletic frame, once softened by years of sacrifice and routine, now bore the signs of his disciplined fitness regimen. His presence commanded attention without demanding it, an effortless blend of grace and power. As he adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at the cafe's elegant glass facade, something unusual caught his eye. Across the street, weaving through the crowd of hurried pedestrians, was a figure he hadn't expected to see again. Nancy. At first, Ollie thought his mind was playing tricks on him. The years had certainly changed her. She moved hesitantly, clutching the hand of a little girl no older than 5, her gaze darting nervously toward the crosswalk ahead. Her blonde hair, once flowing and radiant, was now dull and pulled back into a loose ponytail. Her face, once glowing with youth and vitality, was marked with fine lines and shadows of exhaustion. Her clothes, ill-fitting and faded, hinted at a life far removed from the opulence she had once known. Nancy stepped toward the curb, her grip tightening on the child's hand. She hesitated at the edge, glancing back to ensure her daughter was safe. It was then that her eyes wandered upward and locked onto Ollie. Time seemed to stand still as their gazes met. Her wide blue eyes, once full of life and mischief, now reflected a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else: regret. Ollie's expression remained steady, unreadable, though his heart gave a single, hard thud. He hadn't seen her in 7 years, and yet here she was, as though fate had orchestrated this meeting to force closure he hadn't sought, but perhaps still needed. Nancy froze mid-step. Her breath caught as she took in the sight of him. He was unrecognizable from the man she had left behind. His aura of success was undeniable, from the perfectly tailored suit to the quiet power with which he carried himself. Even his posture had changed, no longer weighed down by heartbreak or the need to prove his worth, but upright and self-assured. For a fleeting moment, Nancy seemed to consider turning away, disappearing back into the crowd. but something rooted her to the spot, her eyes unable to leave Ollie's. The little girl tugged at her hand, whispering something, but Nancy didn't respond. Her gaze remained locked on the man who had once been her husband, the man she had walked away from in search of something she thought she was missing. Ollie, meanwhile, studied her silently. He saw the weariness in her eyes, the strain etched into her features. She was thinner than he remembered, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of her choices had become too much to bear. The vibrant, carefree woman he had once loved seemed like a distant memory, replaced by someone who had faced hardships she hadn't anticipated. His heart ached, not with longing, but with a quiet sense of closure. Nancy had been his world once, but that was a lifetime ago. The man he was now didn't dwell on the pain of her departure. He had found a way to move forward, to build a life that was full and meaningful without her. And yet, seeing her now, standing across the street in worn clothes with a child at her side, stirred a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Nancy took a hesitant step forward, leading the little girl toward the crosswalk. Her movements were slow and unsure, as though she wasn't certain whether to approach or avoid him altogether. But as the light turned green, the flow of the crowd pushed her forward, forcing her into motion. Her gaze flickered between the path ahead and Ollie, who remained rooted in place, watching her approach. The child, curious but shy, clung to her mother's hand, her wide eyes darting between the tall, imposing man and the busy street around them. She had Nancy's blonde hair, though it was cut into a neat bob, and her small features held a sweetness that contrasted sharply with Nancy's worn demeanor. Ollie's gaze softened as he took in the sight of the little girl, his mind briefly wondering about the life Nancy had built after leaving him. As Nancy drew closer, her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her eyes, still fixed on Ollie, betrayed a whirlwind of emotions: shock, regret, uncertainty, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. She stopped a few feet away, her hand tightening around the little girl's. "Ollie," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the street. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her without speaking. His expression remained calm, almost indifferent, though his heart raced with memories and questions. He noticed her glance toward his car, her eyes lingering on the sleek lines of the vehicle that spoke of his success. It wasn't gloating, but a quiet reminder of how far he had come since the day she left. The pause between them stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Nancy seemed to struggle for something to say, her free hand fidgeting with the edge of her coat. "It's been a long time," she murmured, her voice laced with hesitation. "It has," Ollie replied simply, his tone steady. The little girl tugged at Nancy's sleeve, breaking the tension. "Mommy, who is that?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Nancy hesitated, glancing down at her daughter before looking back at Ollie. She seemed at a loss for how to answer. Ollie, sensing her discomfort, crouched slightly to meet the child's gaze. "Hello," he said gently, his voice warm. "I'm an old friend of your mom's." The little girl blinked up at him, her shyness giving way to a small, curious smile. "Hi," she said, her grip on Nancy's hand loosening slightly. Nancy's throat worked as she tried to speak again, but Ollie straightened before she could form the words. His gaze, steady and composed, met hers one last time. "Take care, Nancy," he said, his voice carrying no bitterness, only a quiet finality. As he turned and walked into the cafe, Nancy remained frozen, her daughter's hand still in hers. She watched him disappear through the glass doors, the image of the man he had become searing itself into her mind. The years had changed them both, but in that moment it was clear that Ollie had emerged stronger, while she was left grappling with the weight of her choices. For Nancy, the encounter was a stark reminder of what she had lost, a life built on care, love, and stability. For Ollie, It was the final chapter in a story that had long since ended. The door had closed, and he had moved on, leaving her to face the reality of her decisions alone. A lesson in grace, expanded in detail. The autumn sun cast a warm glow on the bustling city streets as Ollie and Nancy stood face to face after 7 long years. The years had transformed Ollie into a picture of success, poised, confident, and seemingly untouched by the pain of their past. For Nancy, time had told a different story. Her clothes, worn and ill-fitting, hinted at struggles that had left their mark not just on her appearance, but also on her spirit. Clutching the hand of her 5-year-old daughter, Emma, she looked at Ollie with a mixture of disbelief and regret. Ollie, calm and composed, studied her silently for a moment. His gaze flicked briefly to the little girl, whose shy eyes peeked up at him curiously before returning to Nancy. When she finally found her voice, it was shaky but tinged with desperation. "Ollie, it's been so long," she began, her eyes glistening. "Life hasn't been easy for me. For us." Ollie nodded, his expression calm but unreadable. "I can see that," he replied, his tone steady and unyielding. Nancy hesitated, struggling to articulate the weight of her struggles. She spoke haltingly of the challenges she had faced as a single mother, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, enduring sleepless nights of worry, and sacrificing her own needs to provide for Emma. Her voice cracked as she admitted that she had overestimated the freedom she had sought, only to find herself burdened by loneliness and regret. "I never imagined it would be this hard," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the pavement. "Emma deserves so much more than I can give her. I don't know if I made the right choice all those years ago." Ollie's jaw tightened briefly as he listened. He could feel the weight of her words, the acknowledgement of her mistakes hanging in the air between them. He had every reason to walk away, to let her live with the consequences of her choices. But as he looked down at the little girl standing quietly by her side, something softened in him. Nancy continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you, Ollie. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but Emma, she deserves a chance." Ollie took a deep breath and let the moment settle. His mind replayed the years of pain, the struggles he had faced to rebuild his life after her departure, and the man he had become in her absence. But instead of bitterness, he felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Her leaving, painful as it had been, had taught him to value himself, to prioritize his own happiness and purpose. "Your leaving was the best thing that happened to me," Ollie said calmly, his voice steady but not unkind. Nancy's eyes widened, and she visibly flinched at his words. He held her gaze, continuing, "It taught me to value myself." The words hung in the air, firm but devoid of malice. Ollie wasn't seeking to hurt her. He was simply speaking his truth. Nancy blinked rapidly, her composure faltering as tears threatened to spill over. Ollie shifted his attention to Emma, crouching slightly to meet her eye level. "Hi there," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Emma," the little girl replied shyly, her small voice barely audible over the hum of the city. "It's nice to meet you, Emma," Ollie said, offering her a kind smile. He straightened and turned back to Nancy. "She's a beautiful child." Nancy nodded, wiping at her eyes. "She's my whole world," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want her to have opportunities, to grow up with the things I never could give her." Ollie studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a checkbook. Nancy's breath hitched as he clicked his pen and began writing. His movements were deliberate, his expression calm and unwavering. When he finished, he tore the check from the book and held it out to her. Nancy stared at it in disbelief, her hand trembling as she took it. The number printed on the check, 100,000, took her breath away. "This is for Emma," Ollie said firmly, "for her education. Every child deserves a chance." Nancy's lips parted, but no words came. She stared at the check, overwhelmed by the sheer generosity of his gesture. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she looked back at Ollie. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. "Ollie, You don't have to say anything," Ollie interrupted gently. "This isn't about you, Nancy. It's about her." His words carried no anger, only a quiet strength that left Nancy momentarily speechless. She looked down at Emma, who tugged at her sleeve with a curious expression, and then back at Ollie. Her regret, her gratitude, and her shame all warred within her as she clutched the check to her chest. Just then, a voice called out from behind, "Ollie, we're going to be late for the flight." A woman's melodic tone broke the moment, and Nancy turned to see a stunningly beautiful woman with a warm smile approaching. She carried herself with grace and confidence, radiating kindness as she waved toward Ollie. "Coming," Ollie replied, his tone softening as he glanced toward his fiancée. He turned back to Nancy, his gaze steady. "Take care of yourself, Nancy, and take care of her." Nancy could only nod, her voice failing her as Ollie turned and walked away. She watched as he joined, the woman who greeted him with a loving smile. Together, they stepped into the sleek black car, their laughter audible even over the din of the street. As the car disappeared into traffic, Nancy stood frozen, clutching the check in one hand and holding Emma's tiny fingers in the other. Her heart ached with regret, not just for the life she had left behind, but for the man Ollie had become, a man of strength, integrity, and boundless grace. In that moment, she realized what she had lost. Ollie had risen from the ashes of her betrayal, not with bitterness, but with dignity and purpose. His forgiveness, embodied in the gesture of a check meant for her daughter's future, was a lesson in compassion she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The final chapter. A lesson in love and redemption. As Ollie's car disappeared into the flow of traffic, Nancy stood frozen, clutching the check tightly in her hand. Emma, her 5-year-old daughter, tugged at her sleeve, looking up at her with curious, innocent eyes. But Nancy couldn't move. Her gaze was locked on the direction Ollie had gone. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, a mixture of gratitude, regret, and a profound realization of what she had lost. She looked down at the check in her hand, the $100,000 written neatly in Ollie's strong, steady handwriting. The amount wasn't just money. It was a declaration of who Ollie had become. He had risen above bitterness and pain, above betrayal and heartbreak, and transformed himself into a man of integrity and boundless compassion. His gesture wasn't just for Emma's future. It was a lesson, a quiet act of grace that spoke volumes about his character. For Nancy, the encounter was life-altering. She had spent 7 years trying to justify the choices she made, telling herself that she needed freedom, spontaneity, and passion. But the reality was far harsher. The life she had pursued with such reckless abandon had left her worn, struggling, and alone. And now, standing on that bustling city street, she realized the true cost of what she had left behind. Ollie had been her anchor, the steady force that grounded her in love and security. But back then, she had mistaken stability for suffocation, care for control, and love for obligation. She had craved chaos, only to find that chaos offered no comfort, no solace, and no future. Watching him now, a man transformed by his pain into a force of resilience and strength, she saw clearly what she had failed to see before. Emma's voice broke through her reverie. "Mommy, who was that man? He was really nice." Nancy knelt down, meeting her daughter's wide, innocent gaze. "That was someone very special," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Someone who cares about you very much." Emma tilted her head, her small face thoughtful. "Why didn't he stay with us?" Nancy's breath hitched, and she looked away, struggling to find the right words. How could she explain to a child the complexities of adult choices, the weight of regret, and the realization of missed opportunities? She placed a gentle hand on Emma's cheek, tears brimming in her eyes. "Sometimes, Mommy makes mistakes," Nancy said finally, her voice trembling. "But that man, Ollie, he's someone who shows us that even when people make mistakes, there's always room for kindness and forgiveness." Emma smiled, nodding in the innocent way only a child could, and Nancy hugged her tightly. She felt the warmth of her daughter's small arms around her neck, and for the first time in years, a sliver of hope pierced through her regret. That night, Nancy sat at her small kitchen table, the check resting in front of her. The room was quiet, save for the soft sound of Emma's breathing as she slept in the next room. She ran her fingers over the numbers, her mind replaying Ollie's words. This is for her future. Every child deserves a chance. The sentiment wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just financial support. It was a gift of opportunity, a chance for Emma to rise above the hardships Nancy had endured. And it was also a gift to Nancy, a subtle but powerful message that redemption was possible. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. Nancy spent the night reflecting, her thoughts circling back to the man Ollie had become. He had taught her something profound, not with words, but with actions. Love wasn't about grand gestures or fleeting passion. It was about consistency, care, and the quiet strength to forgive. She thought about the breakfasts he used to prepare, the way he had cared for her when she felt lost, and the effort he had poured into their life together. Those moments, once dismissed as routine, were now revealed to be the truest expressions of love. Nancy resolved to do better, not for herself, but for Emma. She decided to use Ollie's gift wisely, ensuring that her daughter had access to the education and opportunities she deserved. But beyond that, Nancy vowed to live differently. She would no longer run from the hard truths or the responsibilities of love. She would rebuild her life with the same strength and determination she had seen in Ollie. Years later, the echoes of that encounter still lingered. Emma grew up knowing about the man who had given her a chance at a better future. She excelled in school, her natural curiosity and kindness a reflection of the values Ollie had quietly instilled in her through his generosity. Nancy often told Emma stories of the man who had changed their lives, framing him not as a savior, but as an example of the transformative power of love and grace. For Ollie, the encounter marked the final closure to a chapter he had long since left behind. His life with his fiancée flourished, filled with the kind of partnership he had always dreamed of. A relationship built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unshakable trust. Together, they continued to grow, building a legacy that extended far beyond material success. The final chapter of Ollie's story wasn't just about forgiveness or triumph over heartbreak. It was about the enduring power of kindness. His ability to rise above pain and extend grace to those who had wronged him became a testament to the kind of man he was. And for Nancy, the encounter became a turning point, a reminder that even in the face of regret, it was never too late to change. The streets of the city continued their endless rhythm, a backdrop to the stories of countless lives. But for two people who had once shared a life, that fleeting moment of connection became a lasting lesson. That love, in its truest form, is not about holding on, but about letting go with grace. Dear reader, thank you for joining me on this journey of love, loss, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe for more tales that explore the depths of human experience. Join our community of readers who believe in the power of storytelling to illuminate life's most profound truths. Subscribe now to receive monthly collections of emotional, character-driven stories, exclusive access to expanded chapters and alternate endings, behind-the-scenes insights into the inspiration behind each tale, early access to upcoming narratives, special features on the locations that inspire our stories, including the majestic Swiss Alps. Let's continue exploring the beautiful complexity of human relationships together. With gratitude, your own channel, Mr. Peter Stories.